And we begin in Iraq, which is just coming off its deadliest year since 2008. According to the United Nations mission to Baghdad, 7,818 civilians were killed in sectarian violence this year, alone in Iraq. Add in Iraqi security forces deaths, and that toll rises to more than 8,800. Although the war in that country officially ended in 2011, the violence continues and peace is hard to find. Iraq is that lasting legacy of U.S. intervention in the Middle East, which might explain the results of a new global poll conducted in over 65 countries around the world at the end of 2013. Done by the worldwide independent network and Gallup, the poll asked people, which country do you think is the greatest threat to peace in the world today? And far and away, the not-so-distinguished honors went to the United States, with 24% seeing America as the greatest threat to peace. Other nuclear-armed nations rounded out the top three, with Pakistan in second at 8% and China in third at 6%. Now, some of the strongest anti-U.S. sentiments came from Russia and China, where roughly 50% of respondents in each country pointed to the U.S. as the greatest threat to peace. Even residents in allied nations like Mexico, Brazil, Spain, and Germany, as well as residents in Islamic nations like Algeria and Indonesia, all picked the U.S. as the top threat to peace. Other nations like Lebanon, Iraq, and Tunisia picked Israel as the greatest threat to peace. Meanwhile, those living in Poland and Georgia found Russia to be the biggest threat to peace. Now, despite the overwhelmingly negative attitudes the world has toward U.S. policies that threaten peace, the poll also asked the global community which country they would prefer to live in. And the United States topped that list as well by 9 points. So there's that consolation for Americans. But what should we take away from these numbers? As Iraq continues its descent into violence, is it time for the United States to rethink its role as the world's policeman? Well, joining me now to help answer that question, I'm joined by retired Brigadier General David Reist. He's Vice President of the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies, Strategy, and Planning Division. Brigadier General Reist, thanks for joining me. Let's start with Iraq, a brutal 2013. Do you believe that this violence is a consequence of the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the occupation that followed years after?
Sam, I don't think there's a direct correlation between our occupation and what's happening today. I believe more than anything else, it's the way the situation in Iraq was left, and then the power brokers inside Iraq settling disputes or grasping for those elements which will give them control in the future within that country, which is a very rich country relative towards natural resources. And I think that's what a lot of the fight's about at this point in time.
When you say how we left, I remember in the 2008 election, John McCain caught a lot of flack because he said, you know, I'd stay there 50 years, 100 years, as long as it takes. Are you saying that the U.S. left Iraq too soon?
I don't think we left too soon, because obviously the way our nation conducts wars and engaged is based on the political will. And our country's just wasn't behind it at that point in time. But I believe, from at least how I engaged in Anbar province, and I was there for about a year and a half through the mid-2000s, I believe we could have set them up for a little bit better of economic success, which would have ensured a lot more of the security that was needed at that time. And by not setting up those economic deals and those structures, you can put all the policemen or all the military you want in the world. When that oversight of that thumb, when the parents aren't there anymore, be it Iraqi forces or U.S. forces, things are going to happen. And unfortunately, when people squabble for those financial assets, it's going to get brutal.
Well, what happens now? You know, what's to be done in that country? We can't. The U.S. population isn't willing to send more troops back to Iraq at this point. Obviously, the president and Congress aren't going to be on board with that. So, does the U.S. have any sort of role in creating peace in that country at this point?
That's a great question, Sam. And if I had the answer to that one, I wouldn't be sitting here. But I would offer, I think we continue to need to stress those things that the United States stands for, those things which are right. And that will manifest itself across time. When you gave your intro, you spoke about that a lot of people don't like the United States, but they'd still like to live here. And you mentioned that that was a consolation, almost like a consolation prize. You might view it like that, But the people of the world, I still believe, and a lot of people still think this, that the United States is that country that's the beacon. We need to continue to act like a beacon. Don't waver from those policies, those issues, and eventually things will work out. But consistency in foreign policy and things like that, they take time and effort, and unfortunately, innocent people are being caught in the middle right now in a very tumultuous Middle East with the Arab Spring and all that comes with that.
Well, on that poll you just mentioned, you brought up that disconnect of the U.S. being far and away the leader in this poll as the greatest threat to violence, and yet a plurality of people around the world still want to live there. How do you explain that disconnect, and does it suggest that that the world still wants the United States there? They just want the United States to live up to the ideals that the United States says it is trying to live up to, rather than exporting violence across the world.
Yeah, Sam, and I think you just hit that nail on the head. And unfortunately, in a couple of the countries that you mentioned that have the highest anti-U.S. opinion, there's a lack of a freedom of press, which is one of the things when people look at the United States, they very much strive for. That dichotomy in those two views speaks exactly one of the troubling things. No one who's doing anything bad likes the police around. And I shy away from that term police action because I don't think the United States is trying to be the world's policeman, but that's how that perception is. Changing and altering that perception where we manifest our good qualities without being too heavy-handed, there's an art to that. There's not a science. Engaging with every country is going to be a little bit different, and we have to be exceptionally careful in the way our government engages throughout the globe, or we will run into opinion polls that you cited, and those who don't have the freedom of the press won't get the good side of what the United States offers or is trying to do.
Retired U.S. Marine Brigadier General David Reist. He's also the Vice President of Strategy and Planning at the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. Thank you.
You're welcome, Sam.